9:37 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 9:37 McDonnell says Labour's Brexit policy has been evolving. Richard Partington. John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, said this morning that Labour's Brexit policy has been evolving in recent weeks. Speaking at the Resolution Foundation, he also said that the Conservatives would need to rethink their opposition to staying in a customs union with the EU, a clear hint that Labour will back an amendment tabled by rebel Tories to the Taxation, Cross-Border Trade Bill, proposing this when it gets put to a vote in the coming weeks. McDonnell said, "Our position is yes, we want to see on the table a customs union negotiation, not the customs union. We think there could be a reform. A customs union is a way forward, particularly in solving some of the issues around Northern Ireland. What we're concerned about is that the government have ruled even that option off the table. I think they're going to have to come back and readdress it. We're not supporting membership of the customs union, but we are looking at a customs union. The reason we're saying a customs union is because we don't want the same asymmetric relationship that Turkey have got. What we would want is to negotiate around our ability to influence the trade negotiations that would take place on behalf of us all, both ourselves and European countries, in terms of trade via a customs union. That would be the discussion we would want to open up." But he also said Labour was not ready to reopen the debate about staying in the single market. He said, "We respect the referendum result and many people who voted for Leave and others may not feel that's respecting the result itself because we have to adopt all the four freedoms if the UK stays in the single market. We think we can develop a new relationship with Europe that overcomes many of those perceived disbenefits, and that's why we think we can get as close to single market as we can and gain the benefits from it." Jeremy Corbyn is expected to deliver a major speech on Labour's Brexit policy early next week. John McDonnell. Photograph, Sean Smith for The Guardian. Updated at 9:54 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 9:22 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 9:22 9:03 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 9:03 Theresa May arrives at Chequers for key Brexit Cabinet Subcommittee meeting. 9:02 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 9:02 An armed police officer patrols the entrance to Chequers, the official country residence of the Prime Minister, where ministers this afternoon will be holding a key committee meeting on Brexit. Photograph, Darren Staples, Reuters. 8:48 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 8:48 Summary of the European Scrutiny Committee's Brexit hearing. Here are the main points from the European Scrutiny Committee hearing with Robin Walker, the Brexit Minister, and Sir Tim Barrow, the UK's ambassador to the EU. The UK could have to pay an extra £5 billion to the EU if the transition period lasts beyond December 2020, as Theresa May wants, MPs were told. The government has publicly said that the amount it will pay the EU as it leaves is between £35 billion and £39 billion. But Sir Bill Cash, the Conservative MP who chairs the committee, said the committee had been told this figure was based on the assumption that the transition would conclude at the end of December 2020, which is what the EU wants, not at the end of March 2021, which is what the UK is proposing. Cash said, "It is our advisor's view that under the arrangements in prospect, although the government and the EU reached agreement on the principle of the amount of money to be paid by the UK, the agreement only covers the period up to the end of 2020. If the transition lasts beyond 2020, then this could require the UK to make payments into the EU budget for 2021 as well, and therefore from January 2021 would then be paying into the EU's new long-term budget, and the net result of this is that the additional cost could run into billions of pounds, and the estimate is between £4 billion and £5 billion. Walker did not dispute this, and Barrow actually confirmed that the £39 billion figure was based upon the assumption that the transition would end in 2020. But Barrow also claimed that there was not much difference between the EU and UK proposals for the transition. Walker said the government wanted more feedback from the EU about its Brexit plans. EU leaders routinely complain that they have not heard enough from London about what Britain wants after Brexit. But Walker claimed the government had already provided quite a lot of information about what it wants, in papers published last summer, and he said it was frustrating how little feedback it had received from the EU. He said, "We have set out many of our positions on the future relationship already. We published a large number of papers over the last summer. I think it has been, to be frank, and I've said this to EU colleagues, who would not be surprised to hear me say it, it has been one of the frustrations of the sequential approach that they have asked us to take, that we haven't been able to get the feedback and engagement on all of those papers that we might have liked." Walker claimed that the alignment promised as a possible means of avoiding a hard border in Ireland would not involve Northern Ireland taking EU rules across the board. Joint Report, PDF, published in December. In paragraph 49, the UK proposed 3 alternative means of avoiding a hard border, that last of which would involve regulatory alignment. But Walker insisted this did not mean wholesale adoption of EU regulations in Northern Ireland. He said, even option C is focused on those areas which underpin North-South cooperation and have already been agreed by devolved government in Northern Ireland as areas of North-South cooperation, or indeed are coming under the Good Friday, Belfast Agreement. So I think this is very much where alignment needs to be maintained to maintain that existing relationship. It is not talking about alignment, or taking EU rules across the board. It's an important distinction to make. Also, as David Davis has pointed out, we can look at alignment as outcomes-based, rather than necessarily based on rule-taking. For the record, this is what paragraph 49 says: the United Kingdom remains committed to protecting North-South cooperation and to its guarantee of avoiding a hard border. Any future arrangements must be compatible with these overarching requirements. The United Kingdom's intention is to achieve these objectives through the overall EU-UK relationship. Should this not be possible, the United Kingdom will propose specific solutions to address the unique circumstances of the island of Ireland. In the absence of agreed solutions, the United Kingdom will maintain alignment with those rules of the internal market and the customs union which, now or in the future, support North-South cooperation, the all-island economy and the protection of the 1998 agreement. Barrow suggested that the UK have to implement more EU law during the transition than previously assumed. David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, has repeatedly played down the significance of the UK agreeing to implement new EU law during the transition on the grounds that it takes almost 2 years for new EU laws to be implemented anyway, meaning that the UK will have been consulted about new rules coming into force. Barrow said that this applied to secondary EU law, directives and regulations. He also said there would be no new primary EU law, new treaties. But, in response to a question from David Jones, the former Brexit minister, Barrow conceded that there would be new tertiary legislation coming into force affecting the UK. Jones cited fisheries discard rules as an example. Barrow said this was why the UK wanted a joint committee to be set up during the transition to allow the UK to be consulted on these measures. Types of EU legislation. Photograph, UK Parliament. Barrow played down the prospect of the UK being able to block new EU legislation it does not like during the transition. Asked by Jones if the UK would be able to say no to new EU laws, Barrow said, the provisions within the Joint Committee will be so that we can raise concerns and seek to resolve those concerns. That is what this is about. Walker conceded that the EU has not yet agreed to allow the UK to sign trade deals during the transition. He said the UK wanted to be able to sign trade deals during the transition on the basis that it would not be able to implement them until after the transition is over. But it was put to him that this appears to conflict with a line in the EU's transition position paper, PDF, saying during the transition, the UK may not become bound by international agreements entered into in its own capacity in the areas of exclusive competence of the Union, unless authorised to do so by the Union. Walker said this issue had yet to be resolved. He said, this is a point clearly for negotiation, when we are taking the position that we do want to be able to reach those agreements, we do want to be able to sign those agreements, but we won't be bringing them into force in a way that conflates with our commitments under the implementation period. I think that is, in the negotiation to come, something that we should be able to secure. 7:21 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 7:21 Number 10 rejects Stormzy's claim Theresa May has forgotten about Grenfell Tower victims. Jessica Elgott. As my colleague Ben Beaumont Thomas reports, at the Brit Awards last night the South London MC Stormzy accused Theresa May of forgetting about the Grenfell Tower victims. Theresa May, where's the money for Grenfell? He asked. This morning Downing Street hit back, insisting that the government was not holding back money from the Grenfell victims. The Prime Minister's spokesman told journalists, the Prime Minister has been clear that what happened at Grenfell was an unimaginable tragedy which should never be allowed to happen again. She is determined the public inquiry will discover not just what went wrong but why the voices of the people of Grenfell had been ignored for so many years. In terms of support for people who were affected, £58.29 million has been committed. That's £28 million as announced at the budget for ongoing mental health and emotional support for people affected. £15 million has gone towards rehousing, £6 million has gone to survivors through the discretionary fund, £7.7 million for the Bellwin scheme for emergency services to compete them for the additional costs as a result of the disaster, and £2.2 million for local community projects. We are also supporting and monitoring the work of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea to ensure victims receive the system they need in years to come. The spokesman said these figures related to the amount of money committed, not the amount spent so far. He said May had already acknowledged that the initial official response to the tragedy was too slow, but he rejected the suggestion that the government was not taking the matter seriously. The spokesman also said there were no plans to contact Stormzy to discuss this with him directly. Stormzy at the Brit Awards last night. Photograph, Daniel Leal-Olivas, AFP, Getty Images. 7:06 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 7:07 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 7 o'clock. 6:57 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 6:57. 6:50 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 6:56. 48 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 6:48. 6:40 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 6:46. 35 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 6:35. 6:31 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 6:31. 6:29 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 6:29. David Jones, the former Brexit minister, goes next. Q. Is the government proposing any exemptions from EU law during the transition? Walker says the UK will no longer be covered by the Common Fisheries Policy. It is also proposing a joint committee that would allow the UK to raise any concerns it has about new EU legislation. Barrow says, on defence and security, the government has said it wants to be able to move forward to future arrangements during the transition, not after it is over. Q. So, with minor exceptions, there will be complete acceptance of EU law during the transition. Walker says that is what the Prime Minister set out in her Florence speech. Q. Will Parliament be advised if any new EU law is introduced during the transition? Yes, says Walker. The government would want Parliament to carry on playing a scrutiny role. Sir Bill Cash, the committee chair, says the scrutiny reserve the power that allows Parliament to stop ministers agreeing to new EU measures until they have been considered by MPs and peers, will not apply after Brexit. Walker says that is a consequence of the UK leaving the EU. 6:23 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 6:23